Welcome, everyone. Sorry you had to wait in the waiting room a little bit.
It was all my fault.
I wasn't going to throw you under the bus.
That's okay. I'll throw myself under the bus.
Okay, good.
Is everybody in? Are we ready to go?
And I'll just let people in as they come.
Okay, excellent. We've got a good host, so we've got a good group today. And on behalf of the Straw Dog Writers Guild, it is my great pleasure to introduce Steven Radecki, the managing editor of Paper Angel Press. Today, he's going to speak to us about small publishing in a big universe. Before we get started, though, let me just remind everybody that the next Straw Dog event is Writers Night Out, June 6th, the first Tuesday in June, with Shanta Lee Gander. And so with that, take it away, Steven.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come here and talk to you all about the subject. Give me just a second. I have just 100 or so slides to share with everybody. Kidding. Okay, Steven, you can tell me if this goes wonky.
It worked.
Okay, yay. Okay. Oh, but the fonts are, because the fonts aren't installed on this MacBook. Oh, well, it's always something. So the title of this, okay, so this is being presented as a workshop. And I realized if I wanted to cover everything that I'd hoped to cover, it really would be an all-day workshop. So I kind of scaled it back a bit to just hit some key topics. But rather than just have you listen to me drone on for an hour and a half, feel absolutely free during the presentation to raise your hands and ask questions during it, because I really only have about 12 slides. So I was planning to leave plenty of time for interrogation and Q&A and whatever. So the topics I plan to cover, I'm going to do a quick introduction of myself and the different things that I'm part of. We're going to talk a little bit on what do we mean when we say self-publishing. What do we mean? I got some information that the people in this group come from the whole spectrum of experiences. New writers just starting out trying to get their first story published, to people who have many books published through a traditional publisher. So we're going to spend just a couple of minutes mostly on that low end, talking about some of the myths and truths about being a writer and about publishing. And I'll be particularly interested to hear the experience of people on the higher end of the spectrum. One thing I do want to say is, and I think most people will agree with this, everybody's experience is going to be different. The way we do things, the ways I've experienced it, is going to be very different from almost everybody else in this group. And that's what I think is going to be particularly interesting. I'm not going to talk about what is small publishing twice. I suspect I moved that slide and forgot to update this screen. We're going to do a compare and contrast real quickly about traditional versus small publishing and self-publishing versus small publishing. We're going to do a quick overview of the publishing process for people who might be new to it, so they kind of understand what, start to finish, what it looks like. We're going to do, there's going to be a little informational slide of what I call Monopoly, the publishing edition. This is not available for sale in stores, but you can purchase it here. The reality of getting into bookstores, because I have this discussion frequently, particularly with new authors, about, well, I want to get my book in the bookstores, and the challenges around that. Some of the general marketplace challenges that all authors and all publishers are facing, particularly small publishers. A quick discussion about getting reviews, because reviews drive all sorts of things from a promotional standpoint to algorithms on Amazon and a whole lot of other things. So they're very important, and they're also very challenging to get. Also presenting you with some guidelines that you might want to consider if you want to choose a small publisher. So things to kind of think about when you're weighing that decision. And then a quick slide on how to contact us if you have additional questions or you want to publish through us or whatever. Any questions before we get started? I'm going to take that as a no. So who am I? I am the managing editor of Paper Angel Press and its imprints. I am also a novelist, short story author, and technical writer by trade. I have been a technical publications manager and college instructor and a certified project manager. So I've worn a lot of hats in my many years in Silicon Valley. But related to that, because I've worked for companies of so many different sizes, I have a lot of insight into how the businesses are run. So that was, we'll talk about that a little bit later. That was very useful when we started this business. I kind of came into it with a little bit more knowledge than a lot of people come into it with. I have many, many years of experience in all areas of the publication field as a writer, as a publisher, as an editor, as a layout person. I like to tell people that I'm essentially a one-person publications department, except I don't do the art, and that's all you want is stick figures. I am also the executive producer of Small Publishing in a Big Universe podcast, because a little over a year ago, I figured I didn't have enough to do. So that was something on. We're just about to hit our second year in production in August. Who we are, just to kind of break down the different pieces for you to give you some context. Paper Angel Press was the original publishing company when we created it back in 2015. And now we separated it out into different segments now to make it easier in terms of marketing. So Paper Angel Press is now just fiction and mysteries. Water Dragon Publishing, which is our largest imprint at the moment, is speculative fiction. And then we have Unruly Voices, where we do memoirs, poetry, and self-improvement books. Small Publishing in a Big Universe, we have, as I mentioned before, the podcast. And last year, we launched the Small Publishing in a Big Use Marketplace, because one of the things that we want to start, it's basically our way to give back to the community. When we want to provide a platform for independent authors to be able to have books at conventions and to promote their books, as opposed to just doing it alone. It's been a little slow getting it off the ground, but if you see any references to that, that's what that's all about. Any questions? All right. So what is small publishing? And as I said, we're only going to talk about this once. Also known as independent publishing. Essentially, it's a small publishing company that's not connected in one of the big 5 publishing corporations. Now, this can be sometimes a little bit misleading if you follow the industry for a while, because there's a lot of small publishers that have gotten gobbled up as an imprint of a larger publisher. So if you don't know that, you might think that they're still a small publisher. So it's really important to kind of look at the about us and find out who they are and where they are. Small publishing is also self-publishing. Small publishing is not publishing, as I said, as a small imprint of a larger publishing. And I don't consider small publishing being part of vanity presses, where you are paying somebody else to publish your book. At a higher level, some people may group it under that, but I'm definitely of the opinion that the money should flow towards the writer, right? Go Writers Guild. Any questions? Debates, disagreements? All right. So as I said, we're going to talk a little bit about, for the less experienced folks in the group, some of the myths and truths about being a writer. Myth 1, you can make a living wage working solely as a writer. Stephen King can. He's one of the lucky ones. The truth behind that is most authors earn most of their income from writing related activities rather than from book sales. They do it by doing writing workshops. They do it by doing presentations. They might do it by other things that are related to writing, but not necessarily through the sales of their books. Now, one of the nice things about that is when you do workshops and appearances or whatever, you tend to sell books, but not usually enough to offset it. But that's everybody. I think that's the dream of almost every writer, is this is how I'm going to make my living from here on. It very rarely happens. Corollary to
Stephen, there's a question.
Yeah.
That someone has, Brian.
Hi,
Oh,
sorry.
not Brian.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. It just, as you were talking about that last slide, I realized I did have a question. When you describe self-publishing, you said small publishing is self-publishing.
Uh-huh.
I think I can understand what the writer gets out of as a benefit from going with a small publisher, like doing the small publishing as opposed to doing it entirely on their own. And I understand, I can theoretically understand what the benefit is to recruiting writers into the small publishing area. What are thresholds to know whether that kind of relationship is a success or not for both the writer and for the self-publisher or the small publisher?
When you say measure for success, like in terms of sales, in terms of number of books sold, in terms of how many people know your name?
Yes. Like how does the writer know that this is the right road to go? How does the small publisher know that recruiting that writer was the right choice as well? Is it only financials, or is there any other factors?
That's actually a really good question. Hang on, let me check my agenda real quick to see if we might cover that somewhere else, because that is a really good question. You know what? I don't cover that. That's a really good question. Can we table that for the end?
Absolutely.
Let's bring that up again at the end, because some of it might get answered, but that's a really good question. So back to this. There are guaranteed techniques you can use that will help you make your book sell. If any of you are on Amazon or Twitter or any of those, you probably get those ads that say how to make your book a bestseller doing, da-da-da. And I made my book a bestseller, and here's how you could do it with this workshop. I promise you, there is no single magic bullet to sales and promotion. There are things you can do to promote sales. There's things that you can help sales, but there's not any one thing that you can do that is going to guarantee a successful book. There are things you shouldn't do, but that's another discussion. But I promise you, there's no single magic bullet that is going to make your book successful. And this is always a fun one that even I have among our authors, is there are consistent editorial standards you can follow. It would be nice to believe that, but it's not true. What one editor, agent, publisher tells you is almost certainly not true for every other agent, publisher, and editor, because every house has their own set of standards. Every editor has their own things that they like and they don't like. Every agent has their own things that they don't like. So if just because that particular one said, no, you need to change it all over because of this thing, doesn't necessarily mean they're right. It just means it's correct for them. And probably the biggest truth about being a writer is the best thing you do for your writing career is start writing the next thing. Because readers like to follow authors. So if they know you've got something else coming out, that's a good thing, as opposed to just, as in the music industry, one-hit wonders. Readers like to actually have authors they can follow and go back to, because they feel comfortable going back after the same thing. I was gonna anecdotally about the previous truth about one editor, publisher, agent. One of the things you may have seen a lot of debate about is dialogue tags. There are a number of editors out there who said it should only be said. She said, he said, that's it. Nothing else. And others are like, no. So go with what you want to go with, take their advice. But what that agent or editor said is not necessarily true of the other one. And styles change. And this is something I experienced myself. What the current editor or style 5 years ago is not necessarily what it is today and what it's going to be 2 years from now. So also take that into account as you're developing your manuscript. Any other questions? Comments? So myths and truths about publishing. In advance is like a bonus you receive when you sign the contract for your book. And you always see people go, oh, I just got my bonus, my advance. most advances are rarely paid in one lump sum. Now, there is a difference, and this is solely based on my own experience. There is a difference between fiction markets and nonfiction markets. I found that nonfiction markets will pay you the whole thing up front because that's all you're ever going to get. Fiction markets, they will sometimes break it down where you get a certain portion when you deliver the manuscript, when you get the revisions, and then when it's published. So something to keep in mind is, you've got this, oh, they're going to pay me and I'm making up this number, $10,000. You're not going to get that all at once. It's going to be spread out possibly over 2-3 years. So you can see why authors, it's hard to make a livable wage as an author when the money is spread out over so much time. The other thing to keep in mind about royalties is you don't start earning those until after the publisher has earned back the advance that they've paid you. So you get a lot of money up front. If your book doesn't sell enough copies, you'll never see any other money from your book. So don't count on that. And most books, the majority of books, never earn out their advances. It's tough news to hear. It's very depressing, but this is the truth in the marketplace. And that ties back to what I just said, is that lump sum you got at the beginning is probably all you're ever going to see from the sales of your book. The other myth is that publishers will take care of all the promotion and marketing of the book for you. Even with the big traditional publishers, this is no longer true. You are probably going to be responsible for the majority of the promotion and marketing for your book. So if you're somebody who doesn't like to do that, you need to plan into your budget to hire somebody to do that, or realize that for most of us introverted authors, we need to build an extroverted piece of ourselves so that we can go out there. And actually, to be honest, this was one of the reasons that we created the SPBU marketplace, is create a platform where people weren't having to go out there alone, that they're going out there with other authors for support. Because it's a lot easier to, be a member of 3 or 4 people behind a table than just you sitting there all by yourself with big puppy dog eyes, hoping that somebody will come buy your book.
You have a question?
Yes.
I was just curious. So you mentioned, for example, advances from a traditional publisher, and that with a small press, you're not likely to be able to make a living from it. But how much can you give a range for how much money authors at a small press actually are likely to make from a book? I mean, the low end is obviously 0, but
right, the low end is 0.
Is that
Well, you see, here's where it gets in. It isn't that I'm hedging. It's a difficult question to answer because a lot of it is very genre driven, and I don't want to spend the time going into the details. But in general, mysteries and romances tend to sell a lot more copies than like hard science fiction. So, and I don't have, because we don't do like romance and we don't do horror yet. I haven't really researched the numbers for those. So I don't mean to hedge, but it's really a difficult question to answer without digging into the genres of the publishers. Most small publishers, keeping in mind that they're small organizations, we're all looking for that big breakout novel too, but we haven't found ours yet. But usually, they're happy if they sell in the high hundreds of copies, whereas big publishers want to see tens of thousands, right? So, you can kind of do the math. If your book sells, call it 200 copies, and you're getting $2 per copy off of each sale, then that's about what you'll probably make.
Great, thank you.
Was there another question?
I don't think so.
Okay, I thought somebody
just commented on your yet about horror.
I have to deny all knowledge about that right now. The only thing I can say is that our fall anthology will be horror. Moving right along. Traditional versus small publishing. Traditional publishing is essentially, when we talk about traditional publishing, we're talking about the big 5 publishing corporations, or as I actually like, one of my authors calls it the big 4.5, because it's really odd the way that they, anyway. The other thing to keep in mind is that traditional publishing tends to be agent driven. Very, very few of the large publishers allow authors to submit directly. They expect stuff to come through an agent. So what that means for an author is you've got to get an agent first, and then the agent needs to shop it around. So that adds to your timeline. And we'll talk about a little bit about that when we talk about the publishing process. Traditional publishers, I think probably all of them pay advances against future royalties. And we just talked about how that works. Now, the agent also gets a percentage of that. And it varies, but it's usually 15%, but it varies depending on the agent and the agreement or whatever. So keep in mind that when I got a $10,000 advance, 15% of that is going to your agent, not to you. And the other thing with traditional publishing is they tend to have unless you've got a highly topical book that they need to get out in the marketplace now, your timeline tends to be years before the point where you submit your manuscript and it's available for sale. That's a long time to keep interest even in your own book and tell people, oh yeah, it's coming out in 2026. And they're like, what? Small publishing tends to be very small organizations and teams, mostly driven by people who just love books and love writing, and this is their dream. They also have small budgets, so you're not going to see full-page ads in Publisher Weekly from a small publisher. Most of them very, very rarely pay advances simply because their bank accounts aren't that big. But in exchange, authors tend to get much higher royalty shares. Most of them split 50-50, although not all of them. So you're not getting a big amount up front, but you're making more off of each sale of each book. So it's kind of a trade-off. Small publishers accept direct submissions by the authors, so you get to skip a whole step. Most agents don't want to deal with small publishers simply because that 15% they would get is so small it's not worth their time and effort. Having said that, we have actually been approached by a couple of agents because they haven't been able to find a home for a book they really love. And says, we'll take it on, sure. Just, as long as you understand the constraints here. With small publishing, the turnaround time between when you submit your story and when it's actually available for sale, publication, can be months, not years. The quickest we have turned around a book is 5 months, and I'm never doing that again. But small publishers can be much more nimble and have a lot more flexibility than the large publishers have, so they can turn stuff around much more quickly. So you're not having to wait as long for your book to see print. And that's very appealing to some people. And when I have this conversation with authors, it's like, okay, the difference is, you go the traditional publishing route, you've got the time lag. They're doing all of the things to try to get reviews and whatever, but your book is just sitting there going through the process. Or you can go with a small publisher, even if it's not us, and you could have, in 6 months, you could be out selling your book, making money. So which way do you want to go, as opposed to still waiting for an agent to pick it up? So let's talk a little bit about self-publishing. Was there a question?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just wondering if, because of the quicker turnaround time, is there less editing?
No.
And small, no. So it's more just a view of fewer clients, so you do it more quickly for each client?
That's not true for us,
okay.
But for some small publishers, yes. I mean, the quality of the editing you're going to get is across the spectrum. But that is not what we would cut, because I don't want to produce stuff that's going to give us a bad reputation. And to do it in the 5-month time frame that I was talking about for that one book, the book was, I think, only 60,000 words. The artwork came together incredibly quickly. we got so lucky that the artist came up with the concept and the author said, oh God, I'd love that. Because that can frequently be one of your longer lead items is the cover artwork. Production, actually the editing time takes longer than the production time. So my answer is no, we don't shortcut the editing. Other publishers might. Did that answer your question? I'm going to take that as a yes. So I often have this discussion with authors also, particularly those who have self-publishing or are trying to figure out if they want to self-publish. And this is basically the advantages and disadvantages that they give them. As a self-publisher, you have full creative control over your work. You have control potentially over the editing. You have control over what fonts are used, what page sizes used, what the page layout looks like, who it gets sold through, everything. You have complete control over that. But it also means that you cover all the costs. So if you have to pay somebody to get it edited, you've got to do that. If you have somebody else develop your cover, you've got to pay for that. You've got to buy your own ISBN numbers. You've got to buy buy all the stuff that even a small publisher would take care of for you. And depending on what it is you're trying to achieve, that can rack up into the thousands of dollars pretty quick. And then you have to think about, okay, how many books do I have to sell to make all this money back? Which is why you see a lot of particularly self-publishers, they publish one book and give up because they realize how expensive it is. And they didn't earn back that money. Now on the other side, if self-publisher, the author gets all the sales revenue. All of it goes to them. They're not sharing it with anybody. They're not splitting with an agent. They're not splitting with the publisher. It all goes into their bank account. The downside of that is they have to manage all of the accounting themselves, which means they have to manage all their expenses. They've got to manage all the sales, all of the inventory, all of the everything. And I know a lot of authors who I hate math. And so if you hate math, it's this right here could be the one that's the breaking point. With small publishing, you will have variable creative control depending on the small publisher and how they operate. Some small publishers don't give the author any control over the cover. Some give them complete, it's a collaborative effort. We're in that latter category. There's no or few costs to the author. Usually the costs to the author in small publishing would be if they want to buy additional copies for their own use. But you have the benefit of ongoing support from the publisher, and I'll explain what I mean by that in just a moment. And also you have its authors network. Usually small publishers and the authors that go with them are very loyal, and so they'll help promote other authors' books by that publisher. And that doesn't tend to happen as much on the big side. So what I mean by also ongoing support from the publisher is with the traditional publishers, a lot of it is very much what I call the movie theater model, movie studio model, where when a movie comes out, it makes most of its money in the first 2 weeks. And that's where, so the studios promote right before it comes out and those first 2 weeks. And then the promotion drops like a cliff, unless it's making a lot of money already and they want to keep driving that. And the same is true in the traditional publishing area as well. Once that book comes out, there's a lot of noise and hurrah, but then they've got their next book and they stop talking about your book. Most small publishers, because they've got smaller catalogs, they can keep interest in the books on an ongoing basis. With small publishing, as we talked about, the author receives a share of the sales revenue, not all of it, and that's dictated by your contract what that percentage is. From an accounting perspective, the manager manages all that accounting stuff, and all you have to deal with is the 1099 they send you in January that you have to record on your tax form. Now, I mean, you can certainly claim other expenses and all of that related to your writing, but in terms of all the other stuff involved, when you publish yourself, you don't have to deal with any of that.
Stephen, there are a couple of questions in the chat that I'll read.
Okay, thank you.
Do small publishers commonly offer cover design? And then how do you, your publishing business, choose what books to publish?
Okay, so if I understand the first question correctly, yes, small publishers provide cover design. I mean, you know, if they're going to publish a book, they want a cover for it. Now that we have had cases, and I know this is true of a couple other publishers I've talked to, where an author will say, "Oh, I've already got a cover for it," or "There's this artist I want to work with on the cover." And so we might go that route where we don't develop it in-house with our resources, but we work with somebody else. Did that answer that question, or did I kind of talk around it?
The person who asked that, Ed, did he answer it for you?
I'm okay, thank you. Yep.
Okay. And how do we choose?
Yeah.
We primarily base it on story. Is this a story? Is this something that grabbed us? And I have to be perfectly honest. There's a number of metrics we use, but one of the number one is if the editor's eye doesn't get turned on while I'm reading the manuscript, this is probably something we want to take a second look at, which means it's well constructed, it's not full of typos, it's well formatted, and we got lost in the story. And so that right there is, okay, you're already above the bar. This is already something we're going to take a second look at. Our tastes are fairly varied, so we'll publish different kinds of fantasy, different kinds of science fiction. We don't do erotica, but I mean I don't know that there's anything within those genres that we haven't published or we've turned down just because we've published some weird stuff. The only reason that we don't currently publish horror is because it's not really my thing, and so I'm not sure how to market it. So we've brought somebody else on board who's going to manage that imprint for us when we finally launch it, who's a specialist in that area.
How large of a team of people do you have that's reviewing manuscripts, or that you're, if something catches your eye and you consult with other
There's
people?
usually 3 of us. Occasionally, particularly when we're deluged in the small, for the short fiction market, we make grovel to some of our authors to see if they can help out a bit. But in general, there's 3 of us that do the vetting. Any other questions?
Well, I'll piggyback on that. So are those same 3 people looking at all of your different imprints?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Because we all have different perspectives even within that. Years ago, I personally got burnt out on epic fantasy, so I'm not a good judge of it. So I really went, okay, what do you guys think? What do you 2 think? Because I think it's okay, but I'm so burnt out on it that I don't want to read anymore. And sometimes the concept is just so cool that we all agree. Let me give you an example. In our Unruly Voices imprint, there's a book that came out a little over a year ago, I think, called Dear Goldie Hawn, Dear Leonard Cohen. And it's a memoir by a woman, but her techniques of dealing with her trauma, rather than doing it as a straight memoir, she did it as writing a series of letters to celebrities who kind of echoed the different phases of her experience. So there's letters to, I can't remember, and some of them are fictional characters, and some of them are people who have been dead for 200 years, but it was such a neat concept. And it was just so well, it was like, oh, okay, we got to do this one. This was just it was such a neat concept. And that author had actually gone the agent route, and the agent hadn't been able to find a home for it. And so the agent came to us, and we published it because it was just such an interesting concept. But that particular book, the author came back and asked if they could do the painting for the cover, because they were also an artist. And so it was kind of a neat collaborative thing where they kind of got to do the whole package. How are we doing on time?
Can I ask a question? You
Yeah.
might have already mentioned this, but so the editing of a book, that's like in conjunction with the author. Do you guys so you work on it together with the author?
It's a collaborative process, yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So we'll do an edit on it, and then it'll go back to the author for them to kind of go through.
Yeah.
And okay, I agree with this. I don't agree with this. Let's talk about this. And we usually do a minimum of 2 rounds, possibly 3, depending on the level of conversation that's happening.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's not a draconian. We don't treat it as a draconian thing that here are our edits, or else. It's a collaborative. It's a collaborative process. So Monopoly, the publishing edition. One of these days, I'm actually going to make a box.
Didn't you skip the previous slide?
Did I? Oh, did I? Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. The publishing process. So we talked about this a little bit, but just to kind of outline it for everybody who may not have gone through it, just so they kind of understand how it works. And this would, I think, answer the one question. So on the traditional publishing side, you require an agent, and your agent shops the manuscript around to publishers, and hopefully someday they find one. Finding an agent can take up to a year. Finding a publisher can take up to a year as well. So before your book is even seen by an editor, you're already at the 2-year mark. For small publishing, the author submits the manuscript to the publisher. The time frame is going to vary by publisher. Our aspirational goal is to do 90 days for novels, 30 days for short stories. In the short story world, that seems to be too long for a lot of the authors, but I mean, we've got a small staff, we can only turn around so many. If you're curious to see what that adventure was like for us the first time, you can go look at our blog and look at the blog post about the Dragon Gems. The first time we opened Dragon Gems for submissions.
There's a question about quarterly statements in the chat.
Okay. That's going to depend a lot on let me read the question for those who aren't looking at the chat. In my sole experience as a small publisher, except for the end of the year tax report, it's difficult to receive an ongoing sales data, i.e. quarterly statements. Is that common across the industry? And I'll ask her the next one in a moment. It's going to really depend on the publisher. I know some small publishers only do the statements once a year and that's it. We do quarterly statements. If you ask me nicely, I will pull ad hoc statements for you. But now that we've got 3 anthologies and all our novelists, I've got like 90 authors that I'm managing. And if I pulled, monthly or weekly reports for all of them, that's all I would be doing. I really want to publish more books than just pull financial reports. So I would say before you sign with a small publisher, take a look at their contract and see how often they report.
Thank you.
Just because the volumes tend to be lower, doing them monthly doesn't make sense for a small publisher. Quarterly seemed about right for me. Because the other thing that we want to be able to track and make it easier for the authors to track that quarterly gives us is they can see if there was a spike due to some event. If we were at Worldcon or we were at BayCon or whatever, they can see if there was a spike in sales that month. And quarterly kind of captures that. If you have to wait for a whole year to get that, you're going to forget that event ever happened.
Yep. Thank you.
And you feel, if you're looking at a small publisher, feel absolutely free to say, are you willing to share a sample of your contract? And if they say no, that's probably not somebody you want to work with. If somebody comes to me and asks for one, I'll send it to them. I got nothing to hide. I don't know. Some of them will post it on their website. I don't do that purely for selfish financial reasons. Is I paid an attorney to help me develop that, and I don't want somebody else stealing it. But if you send me an email and ask for it, I'll send it to you, not a problem. Yeah, we're gonna talk. Yeah, okay, we can talk about contracts now.
There was also a question too about sending out multiple submissions to small publishers.
For that, I would say, and I'm going to do the word I'm looking for. I have another presentation that we've done at some of the events called Preparing Your Manuscript for Publication. And we talk about in there, what does the publisher say on their submissions guidelines? Do they accept simultaneous submissions or not? Some of them do, some of them don't. I mean, that's really the guideline, is look at the publishers you want to submit to and see if they do. We currently do, but I'm on the fence because some authors have annoyed me. Because I've gone back and said, we want your book. Oh, I sold it last month. Thanks for letting us know. All right, so okay, if you're fine with getting them every 6 months, I mean, again, that's gonna be driven by the publisher. You know, how often you get them, you know, as I said, do ours quarterly. And yes, thank you, Vanessa. Yes, I also do. If we've got a big event, I will do one right afterwards, just so people can see, you know, what the sales spike has been after the event. I also, I don't know of any other publisher that does this, but what I will do is if we have an event, I will usually pay out those royalties within a week after the event because I've already got the money. If I'm selling books through Amazon or whatever, I don't get paid for 90 days. But if we've sold books at Worldcon or whatever, I've got that money now, so I can pay the authors. I don't know of any other publishers that do that, but I just think it's a nice thing to do because the author was there working hard at the table. They sold their books. It's kind of a way to reward them for their efforts. But that's me. I'm sometimes a nice guy. You could ask several people who are in the room here. Yes, regards to contract writers beware has several good boilerplate examples you can compare against. So does SFWA. Although the last time I checked, their novel one was a little old. But yeah, I mean, those are definitely good places to look for. Particularly Writers Beware has a good list of here's the things you should watch out for, and here's the things a good contract should have. All of our contracts are based on the SFWA as a basis, but we've added additional, I think, beneficial terms that aren't usually in the other contracts. You know, what's the best resource for small publisher listings? I was asked this at the last presentation, and I honestly don't know if there is really a good one. SFWA lists markets that are small publishers, but it's only for those that pay SFWA rates. And there's a lot of us who can't afford that, particularly when they went up to 8 cents a word a couple of years ago. To be honest, cheap plug here. That's one of the things that Submission Grinder has a good list. They keep it relatively up to date. But that's also one of the things that ultimately I want to do with this small publishing in a big universe marketplace is have a place where small publishers can list it and we can use it as a homepage for that. We're not there yet, but that's one of the things I want to use it for. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'll get back to the, oops.
There was one more. What's the best
Yeah.
resource? Oh, sorry, you already answered that. Never mind.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about. Yeah, okay, no problem. Okay, as I was saying, the getting started part is different between traditional and small publishing. And then once you get to publishing the book, the steps are pretty much the same, regardless of the size of the publisher. The main difference is, the payment piece. If you've gone through an agent, they're getting a chunk of your money. So the first step is the publisher will say, yes, we'd like to publish your book. And you're like, yay, you do the happy dance, and then you get serious, and they send you the contract, and you get overwhelmed because it's full of legalese. If you have an agent, they'll help walk you through most of it. If you're going with a small publisher, you're kind of on your own. I'm perfectly willing, and I've done this a couple of times. Somebody wants to have a Zoom call with me and walk through it so I can explain stuff. I'm willing to do that because I know, particularly if you're a first-time author, there's a lot of stuff in there that it's like, what is all this? One of the things that the SFWA has in their set of standards, and I think this is also on Writer Beware, is the contract should be negotiable. If the publisher comes and says, take it or leave it, you want to leave. Because if they're like that with their contract, they're probably inflexible on a lot of other stuff. So once the contract is signed and submitted, steps 3 and 4 can happen simultaneously because they're different teams that are doing it. I put book cover development first just because sometimes it will have a longer lead time in terms of getting on the artist's schedule. But step 3 and 4 are not dependent on each other. The editor can be doing their thing while the book cover is in development. And how long it takes to get the editorial changes it's really a numbers game. How long is your book? If your book is 50,000 words, it's going to take less time than if your book is 120,000 words. That's just, the reality. So the author would then receive the editorial changes for their manuscript. And then hopefully that will be a conversation of the ones you agree with, the ones you won't. Sometimes you'll get comments that this section really needs to be rewritten because, it would kind of depend. But then, so there will be some number of iterations on number 4. And at some point you're done. Although I know some authors who never want to be done, but you have to be done. And you'll receive the formatted proof for you to actually look at and do your final corrections. And it's a very different, I think the authors who have published here can agree with this. It's a very different experience to see an edited draft versus a formatted draft that looks like it's going to appear in the book. Because it suddenly looks like a real book. And often things will stand out when you're looking at it in a new format that you never saw before, that you're going to want to fix. But I think it's safe to say that receiving that formatted proof for the first time is a, shall we say, a giddy experience. Because it's like, oh my God, it's a real book. It's not a typewritten piece of paper. It's like a real book with headers and footers and page numbers and a font. And I know for many authors, that's a momentous occasion. Final corrections. Now there's marketing things that will happen between 5 and 6. Review copies go out, stuff like that. Most of which the author's not directly involved in. And then number 6, the book is published and it's available for sale. And then the publisher will promote it for some period of time, and then you're kind of on your own. Any questions, comments? Okay. Hello.
Well, I have one other question for you. So, so you mentioned these things, but yeah. As I recall, the first time I did this, there were a bunch of things that I was kind of surprised by. That is, tasks that the author has to do. You have a manuscript that you've submitted, but now all of a sudden, you've got to write a synopsis, and you've got to come up with a biography. You got to get a headshot, and there's a whole series of other tasks that you have to do. You want to talk about that at all?
Sure. So I mean, ideally, you should have your biography or at least a short one ready when you submit, because a lot of them want to see it as part of the submission because they want to know who they're dealing with. Because some of them will look at, you know, have they published anything else? If they have, what have they published? And that should be as part of your biography. In terms of, I don't know if we're unique in this regard or not. And I probably don't communicate this well enough that developing the tagline and synopsis really can be a team activity. But the reason I like to ask the author for it first is I want their take on what they think the book is about. Because I'm going to have my take on it, but I want to see what they think the book is about and to see if those dovetail in such a way, because an author is more likely going to feel comfortable promoting their book if it's being promoted in the way that they believe what the book is, as opposed to what I told them I think the book is. That makes sense?
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's actually a good point. But that's why we do it the way we do is what does the author think the book is about and how would they want to promote it? And then we have a conversation. And it's an iterative process. And we've done this. I've done this a number of different ways. We've done this through email. I've gotten on Zoom calls or Discord with authors, and we've done it live. I mean, it kind of depends on the author. Some of them are very good at it. Some of them are like, I don't know. And so we have to work a little harder. But those things are very important because they're used in the catalog listings. They're used on the website. They're used on the cover. We want to make sure we're all in alignment with what the story is and what they think it's about and how we're going to position it. Was there another part in there that, let me think. I'm trying to think of the to-do list. There's the synopsis. There's a summary. There's the tagline. There's the author photo. There's the biography.
Coming up with lists of reviewers.
Yeah. I mean, we have a standard list, but if there's particular reviewers you want to make sure get the book, particularly if you have local reviewers that we would not be aware of, like a local newspaper periodical or whatever. I mean, it's good to let us know what those are. The only other thing that I can think of that there's two other things in our to-do list, and I don't know if this is true of all publishers. One is, what do you want to see on the front flap of the hardcover edition? What excerpt or summary, whatever. And then the other one would be, what piece of it do you want us to use as a sample chapter? Because we don't have any control over the piece that Amazon shows on their website. They're going to pick some random thing based on whatever. Whereas we'll say, okay, you know what, chapter 3 would actually be a good self-contained thing. And so we'll put that on our website to point to, all nicely packaged up. And
there's also an author's note usually, or at least the option for one.
the option for one, yeah. Acknowledgements, dedication.
And also the title of the book. How does that get developed?
Well, in most cases, the author comes with one. And I can only think of a couple, maybe 3 cases where we've gone, I don't think that's going to work. But usually the author comes with one and it's like, okay. Yeah, as I said, other than those 3 cases, I can't think of a case where we've gone, yeah, no.
I've heard that in traditional publishing, that's not always true.
It may not be. But I can't think of a case where they've come. We've got one right now where none of us are happy with the title and we're kind of trying to figure out what to rename it. But the author came in and said, I don't like this title either, but I don't have any better ideas. So we're still working on that one.
I don't want to hijack the whole presentation, but thank you very much.
So now to the game show, Monopoly, the publishing edition. This is true regardless of whatever publishing model you take, but it's important for all authors. A lot of authors intuitively understand that publishing is a business, but they don't really understand the implications of that. Where it really bites them in the backside is if they decide to self-publish and they realize what they're up against, because they don't. So essentially, publishing is controlled by these companies. ISBN management, you have to have an ISBN if you're going to sell to bookstores, libraries, retail. There's only one place you can get it, and you have to pay their rates. Period. End of discussion. If I remember the last time I checked, it was $99 for one ISBN. I think you could get either 5 or 10 at a slight discount, but you really don't get a decent discount until you're buying 500 or more. And you typically need at least 3 ISBNs for your book because you need one, depending on how many editions you're doing. But if you're doing a trade paperback, hardcover, and ebook, you need at least 3 ISBNs. So right up front, you've got a bunch of money you've got to spend that you have no control over. There's no negotiation. There's no. For print distribution to bookstores and some libraries and so forth, there's Ingram, Ingram Spark. That's it. Pretty much everybody else has dropped out of the retail book business. There's some specialty retailers for libraries and book schools and whatever, but for retail, they get to set the rules. If you want it in a bookstore or in retail, you got to go through Ingram. They just June 1st, May 1st? No, I think it's June 1st. They are no longer charging for uploads, which it used to be $49 a pop. I'm not sure what they're getting out of this to suddenly be giving away, doing this, but it's going to be a big help to small publishers. But I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop because I don't understand why they would be giving away $49 for each book that gets published. Although I have noticed response time has gotten awful in the last 2 weeks, so maybe they're doing it that way. I don't know. But anyway, there's only one source. It has now become less expensive, but you have to play by their rules. You have to use their file formats, their sizes, et cetera, et cetera. Online marketplace sales, I don't think this is a surprise to anybody. There's Amazon and then there's everybody else. There are a lot of everyone else, but it's Amazon and everybody else. For printed books, Amazon is, and these numbers are based on ones I have about a year ago, and they fluctuate, and it depends on the country and the region and genres, but these are pretty on target. For printed books, Amazon is 70% plus of the market. They own the ebook market with Kindle, 80% plus of the market. There's others, there's Nook, there's Apple Books, there's whatever, but if you want to sell your books, you're going to do it through Kindle. Audiobooks, they have a chokehold. Once they bought Audible, they have 90% of the audiobook market. So if you want to do an audiobook, you're going to have to make any money on it. You're going to have to distribute through ACX. And this was a new, because we hadn't done any middle grade titles until last year, and so I had to do a little bit of research as to what that entails. And we've got 2 more coming out, and that author had some past experience, and it was a very eye-opening experience. It's kind of a similar thing that for middle grade in schools, it's Scholastic and everybody else. If you're not published by Scholastic, good luck. You can still get into libraries and whatever, but it takes a lot more effort because your book isn't going to get in the little handouts and what in the Scholastic book shop sales and all of that. So just something to these are things to kind of keep in mind, particularly if you're self-publishing. I know a lot of people have very much an anti-Amazon sentiment, and I can wholly appreciate that. But if you want to sell your books, unfortunately, that's where you got to go. Any questions? Have I depressed everybody now? So let's talk a little bit about bookstores. And what I have a separate presentation on this, but I've distilled it down to just this one slide. Bookstores determine what gets purchased and stocked on their shelves. That's the role of the bookstore owner or the bookstore buyer. That's what they do. They want to stock books that will sell and bring readers into the store to buy other books and merchandise. That they want to do. They want foot traffic, and while you're there buying book X, they want you to, oh, well, why I'm here, I'm going to get book Y, and I'm going to buy some of those bookmarks and that journal. It's really about driving traffic in, what books are going to bring that in, and what's going to cause collateral sales. They also have a limited amount of shelf space. Even a large store like Barnes and Noble that you think, that carries tens of thousands of books, each genre only has a limited shelf space. And a lot of these develop a lot of their space to non-book items. Now, I have to admit, I've not been in our local Barnes and Noble since before the pandemic. But I know when we walked in the door, there was a big book display. And then there was an area over here where they had like journals and whatever, and then they had bestsellers. But when you went past that, before you got to the books, there were all these toys and Legos and non-book things taking up probably, I don't know, a fifth of the space. So that's space that they're not putting books on, which means they're not buying books to put there. So it's a real challenge to get shelf space in books, even for traditional publishers. Now, authors and publishers want to see their books on the shelves in the bookstore. Who of us doesn't, right? That's like a bucket list thing, to be able to go and take a selfie and go, oh, my book, here. The main way to do that is you need to convince the bookstore that there will be a demand in for your book enough that they're willing to reserve space for it instead of another book. Because yes, unfortunately, it is a competition. If they're only going to buy, they've got one shelf and they're only going to buy 12 books that month, you're competing against those other 12 books. And you've got to convince them that they're going to sell some copies of it. And you need to help drive the publicity that's going to create demand for those books. One thing that I tell my authors to do once the book is available for pre-order is tell your friends and family to go to your local bookstore and pre-order it. If you want to see it in the bookstore, go to the bookstore and ask for it, and they will order it. If they get enough orders for it, they don't want to place 10 separate orders. They'd rather place one order for 12, so they have 2 extras, not have to keep churning, right? Something to think about, particularly if you have 10 people who come in all asking for this book. They think, wow, there's something going on with this book. We might want to take a look at it. Now the reality, however, and this is based on our data, and I'm going to share another data point with this, less than 5% of our sales are through bookstores. Across the industry, I just read something, and I haven't been able to find it again, but I'm something like less than 2%. A book has less than a 2% chance of ending up in a bookstore. So you kind of have to think about how much time and energy do you want to devote to getting your book in a bookstore if less than 5% of your sales is going to be from that sales route. I mean, it feels good and it looks good and it's good for your ego and you'll be able to take your selfie and all that, but is that the most productive use of your promoting and marketing time? Just something to think about.
There's a question in the chat. Used to be a rumor that it was the truck drivers that had a lot of influence over what books went into the bookstore. Is that true?
I have no idea. I have not heard that rumor. I have not heard that rumor. That could be true, but I've not heard that. But one of the things that has changed, specific for Barnes and Noble, is corporate has given the individual stores a lot more autonomy around supporting local authors than they used to have. So ideally, if you could build a relationship with that store's manager or buyer, you may be able to get them to at least host an event, if not carry your books. And I've had a couple of authors who's been successful doing that. And they'll bring their books in, they'll ring up the sales, they'll get a percentage. And there's really no downside for the Barnes and Noble other than giving you a table in the corner on a Saturday night or whenever it is. But it's about building those relationships. For other bookstores, I think it's also regional. I think the environment is very different here in Silicon Valley in this part of California than it is in other parts of the country, simply because retail real estate is so expensive and there are so few independent bookstores now that there's fewer locations where you can go to try to get your books in the hands of people. I don't know that that's true in other parts of the country, but at least in this part of California, it's extremely challenging just because there aren't any locations anymore.
So are all books sold through Amazon then? I mean, is that the main way books get sold?
That is 70% of the market. Almost all of the majority of your sales are going to be through Amazon.
Okay.
Now, some of that, a lot of it is also, I'm going to go back to, some of it's going to be based also on genre. Through Water Dragon Publishing, we do a lot of science fiction conventions, and we sell a good number of books in person at those events. So there may be events like that where you may see a nice uptick in sales for a minimum effort. And we'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end. I talk about doing events and stuff. But in terms of, let's call it in terms of passive income, for lack of a better term, your sales, yeah, the majority of your sales are going to be Amazon. Whether it's print or digital editions. Yeah, the bookstore thing is just unfortunately gotten really problematic. How are we doing on time? Wow. Okay. I think I only have one more slide, so I think we're good. So just so that again, yeah, this is the slide I was talking about, so I'll be able to answer your question. Some of the marketplace challenges that all publishers are facing, but this is particularly true for small publishers who have a limited marketing budget in terms of trying to get the word out about the book. Readers have become very accustomed, and many expect 99-cent or free content. So getting them to spend more for a book, $4.99, $3.99, $5.99, unless it's by a known author that they love, is extremely challenging. The current economic environment is making that even worse because people are spending less on luxuries. I mean, there are many of us who, yes, books are not a luxury, they're a necessity, but still, if you're looking, on there and go, I'm looking for something, oh, that one's only 99 cents. You might pick that one over this other one that's $5.99. Events, tables and booths at events can be prohibitively expensive, particularly for general fiction events. And what I mean by this, as I said, we do a lot of science fiction conventions through Water Dragon Publishing. And in general, the genre events tend to be, you can get a table for a fairly reasonable price. What we've discovered, though, is that for what I mean by general fiction events, things that cross genre or are more literary events, they're a lot more expensive. For example, this year we did not do the Los Angeles Time Festival of Books because they wanted $1,000 the booth. And if you do the math, you got to sell a lot of books to make $1,000 in profit. That's a lot of books. We also didn't do the Bay Area Book Festival for a similar reason, is they cut, last year you got 2 days for a price. This year it was Sunday only for the same price and an hour less of selling time. So we were like, yeah, no. But what seems odd about it is that seems to be mostly the trend with the general literary events, not the genre events. They seem to be still fairly reasonably priced. But the other thing that I encourage authors to look at are out of the box locations where their book might be, it might be an opportunity to sell their books. Some of the authors have had a lot of luck at farmers markets, getting a table at the farmers market, particularly if the book has some local appeal, like it takes place there, or there's something in the book that takes place in the location. Because often the tables at farmers markets are like $25 for a day. You don't have to sell a lot of books to make that back. And some people are just curious just because farmers market, somebody's selling books. Well, that's different. We're looking at also here, we're also looking at some of the local art and wine festivals. Because when I went to some of those before the pandemic, there was a lot of jewelry, there was a lot of artwork, there was a lot of painting, there not one bookseller. So my opinion is that the notoriety alone could be potentially interesting. So just something to think about in terms of getting out there and at events, being creative about different ways you might selling books at events where you might not think about, not thinking of it as a book event, but just an event that people are going to come in that they might buy a book if they see it. Bookstores and libraries, as we talked about, getting into bookstores except on a case-by-case basis is becoming nearly impossible. Getting books into systems for libraries, particularly school libraries that do not order from Ingram, is extremely difficult because there's a whole vetting process that you have to go through. So that can be extremely challenging, particularly for the middle grade books. Now, on the plus side, not to be totally depressing, getting the digital edition of your book onto Overdrive for libraries, which is what most libraries use as their system for renting out ebooks, it's pretty straightforward.
There's a question about would you recommend making your book available on Scribd online?
Well, you know what? I don't know that I would recommend it, only because we do, and I'm not seeing a lot of sales do that. But again, one of the things I don't want to go a deep dive in this particular presentation, but for ebooks and for audiobooks, there are services called aggregators. Smashwords is one of them for ebooks. And if you publish through Smashwords, they will distribute it to all these other places for you in exchange for taking a portion of the sales. And one of the places they distribute to is Scribd. Now, the thing about Scribd is you get paid per read, the number of pages read, which has its pluses and its minuses. It's not, somebody only reads 20 pages, you still get paid for 20 pages, but it's like a fraction of a cent. If they read the whole book, you get paid for the whole book. So personally, I don't see any downside, but I wouldn't create a separate account on Scribd. I would use one of the aggregators and let them deal with it, just because it's not worth it in terms of volume.
Are there different rules or expectations for publishing poetry?
Yes, and I can't tell you what they are. I don't mean to be flippant. We've only done the 3 poetry books, and those were, I was peripherally, mostly I just did the layout and the legal stuff. One of our other folks really did the management of the poetry piece of it and all the kind of calls. No, this is worthy. So I apologize. I can't give a strong answer to that. The rules are different. The markets for individual poems is challenging. If you could go in with a whole book of poetry to a publisher, it's a lot better. But that's unfortunately, that's really all the advice I can give. Sorry.
So I think I heard you say, well, at least my notes say,
Yeah.
As far as marketing goes,
Yes.
really the author is kind of doing that. I mean, except maybe if they were lucky enough to have a traditional publisher take their book. In that case, they would probably market it. But if you go to a small press or self-publish, it would be the same thing. You'd be responsible for the marketing. Did I get that right?
Your notes are correct. Now, I do want to add on to that is, and I can't speak for all small presses.
Yeah.
But one of the things when I created this crazy enterprise, when I kind of set down the goals and what we needed to do, it was like, as an author, what would I want my publisher to provide for me? What would make my life easier? So what we provide to our authors is what I don't know that all small publishers do this, but what we provide is what I refer to as our press kit. And it includes all the images you need for social media, high resolution versions of the book cover. It provides a copy of the fact sheet that has all the description and the ISBNs. And so basically you can walk into a bookstore and that's all the information they need to be able to order the book. And having it laid out on a nice little sheet makes you look very professional. For some authors, we've taken the next step beyond that, and we do what are called bookstore packets, which it sounds fancier than it is, but it's basically one of those pocket portfolios, and we stick a label on the front with our logo on it, and inside is the fact sheet and the press release and a postcard that has the book cover and the book information on the back, sorry. And so the idea being, because I can't be everywhere. I can't be in Boston. I can't be in Nebraska. I can't be, but the authors can be wherever they are. So they can put one of these together, and when they walk into a bookstore, it looks a bit more professional because it looks like they've got a professional packet for the book, as opposed to just walking in and going, "Hey, you want to publish my book?" The other thing that we do, rather than, I know a lot of people like bookmarks, and we will do those, but we actually do business cards instead. They have the book cover on the front and then the QR code and the information on the back, simply because business cards are a lot cheaper to print, and they're also a lot easier to carry in bookmarks because you can carry a stack of them in your pocket or in your wallet, whereas bookmarks are these long things that you're going to bend. So we also provide the authors with those in addition to the postcards. I'm going to pick on Steven for just a moment. Did I forget anything?
I don't think so.
I think that's all we provide. We've done other things as one-offs, but we provide all of our authors with at least that baseline of stuff that they can use to, so they aren't starting from the ground up. It's okay, here's the banner you can put on your Facebook page or your Twitter account or your, whatever, and here's the, so at least there's a starting point. So yes, your notes are correct, and then I amended that with additional information. Oh, okay. We've got 2 more slides. Do we have time?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Getting reviews. We all want reviews. And they're hard to get. Reader reviews are important because the number of reviews drive the visibility on Amazon and other marketplaces. The more reviews a book has, the more likely it's going to show up under other readers have purchased or related to this book. Below a certain number, and I think the number is 20. Sometimes it's 50, depending on who you ask. It doesn't trigger that algorithm. So it's, in a way, it's kind of a self-defeating thing. If a book doesn't have enough reviews, it doesn't show up to get noticed so it can get more reviews. But so anyway, that's one of the reasons you want to get readers' reviews. You get them posted on as separate reviews on Amazon, as it drives a lot of these algorithms and metrics so that your book gets noticed more. Reviews by authors of similar books seem to drive awareness and sales better than other reviews. Now, I apologize if that sounds confusing, but what I mean is if another author reviews your book and it's also a fantasy book, so what we would do is, review blurb, author of fantasy title. That's more likely to drive awareness and sales of your book than if you have author blah, 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 of this book of poetry and your book isn't poetry, just as an example. That's kind of an extreme example. So ideally, if you're going to do blurbs and that kind of thing, you want to try to find authors who are in a similar genre, because that connectivity seems to drive sales and getting other reviews. Getting reviews continues to be challenging. A couple years back, we actually did a survey offering people, a special award if they did the survey, going, why don't you do reviews? We really need to understand, why don't you do reviews? And the data was not useful because people never really came out and said, oh, I don't have the time, or I'm afraid that someone's going to make fun of me, or nobody. It was just, yeah, I don't leave reviews. Okay, why not? Maybe someone out there has managed to do some kind of market research where they've gotten more clarity about that. But our attempts have just, people don't do them. And we can speculate as to why, but I don't have any hard data to support it. Our ratio typically is for review copies sent out. For every 10, we might get 1 review. The the 2 times we've done giveaways on Goodreads, the ratio is even worse. You'd think to get a book for free, they would be more willing to give a review, but no. Some of the other things that have become more challenging around professional paid reviews is the most prestigious venues for reviews, such as Publishers Weekly and some of those, are now requiring that they get a copy of the book 6 months before the publication date, which is fine for traditional publishers because they're usually waiting that long anyway. But for self-publishers and small publishers, that's 6 months that we're not making money on your book. We've done it in a few cases, but to be honest, and I don't know if anybody has any other data points on this, we've not found that the paid reviews from services such as Kirkus are driving sales. I've heard in some venues, particularly for school libraries and libraries, having a good Kirkus review lends credibility to it. But in terms of retail sales, we're not seeing the return on investment. So just something to think about. There's a number of review services out there. I'm just saying from our own experience, we're not seeing the return on investment for getting those, even with a good review. I think this is the last slide, yes. So some of the things to think about when choosing a small publisher, if you want to go this route, is small publishing often gets a bad reputation, mostly driven by vanity presses who are charging people money to publish their book. There's a lot of shady practices out there, particularly around contracts and payments. So you really want to take a close look at their contract before you sign up. If you can, talk to other authors who have gone with that publisher and see what they say. Find out if they've had any issues. Small publishing frequently tend to be short-lived businesses, and a lot of them have sudden closures, simply because the owners have thrown up their hands and said, okay, we're done. This happened a lot during the pandemic. The pandemic was not kind to small businesses in general and was horrible for small publishers because we couldn't go to events. Not all of our revenue comes that way, but a fair chunk. And that's where we really raise our awareness. And being cut off from that just was horrific for a lot of small publishers. The flip side of that is a lot of authors decided that since I'm home anyway, I'm going to start my own small publishing business. And that's a whole other story. The other thing that gives them a bad reputation is there's often author perceptions around what a small publisher can deliver. They think that a small publisher, small and nimble, but they don't intuitively understand that a small publisher can't support all of the things that a big publisher can do in terms of distribution and marketing. I actually had an author come to me after the book was published and tell me, I expected my book to be in Costco. And I could just, all I could do was stare blankly at a minute. Was like, huh? Let me tell you all the reasons that is not going to happen. So it's some of that is driven by unrealistic expectations. They think all publishers are the same and can do all the same stuff. So things to look for if you are looking at a small publisher. And most of these have been pulled from the Writer Beware. She's got a section on there where she talks about small publishing. I feel that some of her information is a little contradictory, so you kind of have to go with your own gut as what you feel comfortable with. But things to look at is the length of time in business. I think she says at least 2 years. I would say at least 2 years, at least. We are going, for those who are, before somebody asked, we're going into year 8. We're going into year 8. Take a look at the number of titles that they've currently published and how many they published through each year. So if they've been published for 10 years and they've only published 8 books, it's like, okay, what are they really doing here? Look at their promotional activity, go to their website, go to their social media and see if they're active in promoting their books and their authors, Are they going to industry events? You know, if they're a speculative fiction publisher, are they participating at Worldcon or a local science fiction convention or whatever? If they're a poetry publisher, are they submitting their stuff to the various magazines and so forth? Or is their last tweet from 3 years ago? Look at their contract terms, and are they negotiable? How long is the contract length? And does it have an explicit statement around rights reversion? And I've had a couple of cases where authors, they've become dissatisfied with the previous small publisher, but the contract didn't have a specific rights reversion clause, and they've had to basically go to the wall to get their book back.
There's a question, what is your take on publishing with a university press as opposed to trade press?
My understanding, because I haven't done a lot of research, but I have a couple of authors who've gone that route. And if somebody has more information here than I do, please feel free to jump in and correct me. But it's my perception based on my conversation with these two authors is that a university press handles a lot of the stuff in the same way that a traditional publisher does. And they also seem to have this built-in market that if it gets published, it's also going to get distributed to all these other universities and colleges. So you're kind of guaranteed a minimum number of sales. I've not done any kind of research into like how what contract terms and whatever are at those universities, but that's just based on my conversation with these two authors who had been published by university presses before. Good question.
Can I jump in and just say we're close to our time, and
Sure.
want to say thank you so much for being here today.
You are most welcome. I hope people found it useful and no one fell asleep. Here's the contact information. Absolutely, if you have any additional questions or want more information, feel absolutely free to drop me an email and I will be happy to answer them. I put a
That's
copy
really
of the
good.
presentation at this link that it says here also. So if somebody wants a copy of the slides, they are there.
That's very generous of you, Stephen. And we've recorded it and we'll send out a link to the recording to everyone who was here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming.
I appreciate being able to talk my talk.
Thanks very much. It's helpful.
Thank you. This was great. Really appreciate your expertise and advice.
You're most welcome.
Mitch asks, I asked Stephen, but that's an ambiguous question. Are you referring to me? Oh, he is sending it directly to me. Yes, I am an author with Paper Angel Press.
And he invited me anyway.
All right, we're at time, so I'm going to go ahead and take down the Zoom call.
Okay.
Wonderful to see everybody. Don't forget Writers' Night Out, the first Tuesday in June, and we'll see you then.